And greetings, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Dreamscapes. Today we have our friend Connor, who's got his own podcast, The Blunt Report. You can find that at thebluntReport.com. He's on Instagram, Reddit, all over the internet, Apple, Spotify. Of course, he makes YouTube videos as well. And do you want to tell us just a little bit about what your podcast is?
Please, yeah. So my podcast is, like you mentioned, The Blunt Report. It's kind of an education and science-based podcast, and I guess the whole purpose of it is just to try and get people interested in something they probably never thought they might be interested in. Currently, I'm doing a few different seasons. I'm in the process at the moment of creating one called Other Worlds, which is going to be about extraterrestrial life, biophysics. I speak with a SETI scientist, a whole bunch of this kind of thing, and for the purpose of your listeners, I not long ago finished a series on sleep where I speak with two different sleep experts, discussing why we sleep, its benefits, its negatives, where it comes from, both socially and evolutionary. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy something like that.
Very cool. And since you've most recently spoken with experts, if I ever, I get things wrong all the time. So if I ever start saying something, you're like, that other guy said, go ahead and correct me, or throw out what else you heard.
I'll jump in.
There was another episode recently where I did I started saying, I think it's Carl Rogers. It's not Maslow. And of course, when I went back and edited it for a short clip to put up, I'm like, I flashed on the screen. It was Maslow. Of course it was. I just wasn't trusting my own brain. So as per my usual, and of course, all of these links will be in the description below. As per my usual process, I'm just going to shut up and throw it over to Connor, and he's going to describe his dream. Then we're going to try and figure it out. So I'm ready when you are.
Cool. Okay. Well, I just want to take a second, like I mentioned you before we turn the mics on, and through message, that I am so bad at remembering dreams. And since you first reached out to me, I've been trying to sort of write down any dreams I have, because usually I forget them, or I say to myself, yeah, I'm going to remember this in the morning, and I literally never, ever do. I just remember it.
The best way really is to write it down. Yeah.
I really think so. I had a really good one the other night, and I remember some pieces of it. It was really a juicy, spicy dream, and I was stupid and write it down. But this one was quite, I suppose, significant to me. The next day, I could still feel the dream, and I wrote it down sort of immediately.
Oh, yeah.
And just for a small bit of context, I'm talking about an old workplace, and the old workplace was somewhere I worked in Melbourne, in Australia. Good workplace, hard to work there, and I had to sort of leave it very rapidly. I was only working casually, and it kind of just disappeared. So I was working there almost every day, and then I sort of disappeared. I was quite close with the owner, and just for a bit of context, sort of drop it in.
Yeah.
So the dream itself. So in the dream, more or less, I was returning back to this old workplace, and I was sort of walking into this cafe. The place was a coffee shop. Walking into the cafe, and I saw my old sort of boss / co-worker at the normal spot he would be in the coffee shop next to the coffee machine. And the strange thing was, he was so old, but like he was really old in looks like a comical sense, because his body didn't look any different. It was as if like you got a kid to draw what an old person looks like. The body was exactly the same, but it was just like really dramatic wrinkles on the eyes, really dramatically white hair. But his arms looked the same, for example. His clothes were the same. Nothing else was old, which I thought was kind of strange even in the dream. The shop was like moderately busy, but incredibly bad service. Like things were being dropped and thrown around. It took ages for me to be served. This is before sort of my friend and colleague noticed me being there. It took so long to get the coffee, and I was sort of shocked by that as well. Eventually, when I got given the coffee, my old colleague noticed it was me, and we sort of decided that we were going to go drink a coffee together. He was finishing soon or whatever it might be. We decided to go by the river in Melbourne, go sit by the river. Now, I had one full coffee, and then they gave me like a small amount of another coffee in a cup. It's like service, like extra service. I don't know, maybe they made a mistake. So I kind of ended up with 1.5 coffees, and I was obviously pretty happy about that. We went to the river, and we were talking and kind of sitting strangely like on the edge of the river over the water, which is very weird, not really something I'd do anyway. And we were talking, and I dropped one of the, so both of the coffee cups were closed, and I dropped one of the coffee cups into the river. And I remember this feeling of like, kind of like a bit of annoyance, but not too bad. I was like, oh, this isn't too bad, because I had dropped the one that was like the service coffee, the one that was only half full, the one that was only extra coffee. I dropped that in there. I was a little bit annoyed, but it wasn't the end of the world. And I saw the coffee cups float down the river, and then the lid came off. And then I saw that it was the full coffee, the coffee that I wanted, the coffee that I bought. And I saw like all this sort of milky latte or whatever it was dispersed into the river. And all of a sudden, I got unbelievably, uncontrollably sort of annoyed and upset about this. And that sort of tumbled through a set of different emotions in the dream, eventually getting to a point where I was really, really worried about the waste of money on it. I wasn't even annoyed that I didn't have my coffee. Like, I was so angry that I wasted that money that I'd spent, and it just literally just thrown it into the river. I was so angry about that. And then from there, I started getting mad at the friend that I was with, my ex-colleague, saying that, you know, he bumped me. It was his reason that I accidentally dropped this coffee in the river. I was screaming at him about the money issues that I had, basically, and that he's wasting my money. And that is about the long and short of what I can remember of the dream.
Okay. All right. And yeah, usually just the description is very brief, takes a couple of minutes tops. I mean, it's taken up to 10 minutes with some folks because there's just like multiple scenes, like a movie plays out.
Sorry, I should have done it shorter.
No, that's okay. This is perfectly fine. Yeah. So then we move into the second part where we come back through it, but I was getting a lot of hiccupiness and stutter with your voice coming through, and I followed it pretty well, but I was wondering if we did try something to fix it up a little bit, and I don't know if it requires to go into the phone or restarting the computer or something. I'm not sure what might fix that audio stutter.
The audio was bumpy, was it?
Just a little bit. It just kept kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. Yeah, bumpy is a good way.
Okay.
A stutter-ish, a little.
Alternatively, I can record locally as well.
Suppose so. Then again, now it seems fine. I don't know what's going on.
You have to sync up the audio.
Maybe it just comes and goes. Anyway, I'm going to chop this little bit out. But I just wanted to let you know that we'll just roll with it. I think maybe I just shouldn't have said anything.
You're the boss.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. So, all right. Yes, the second phase, we go back through it again, and this is where I try and see if I can put myself in your experience as much as I can, seeing out your eyes. What is catching your attention? What's going on experientially?
Right.
So you are in the very beginning. The first thing you realize is you're going back into this cafe, a coffee shop that you used to work at. Did you appear in the dream first outside looking at the building, or kind of become aware of it as you're already inside?
Yeah, I don't remember the exterior of the building. I remember like the picture that I have of when I start work is like walking through the first front door and like seeing the scene of like the bench, the coffee shop, the kitchen behind it, the tables to the right, and that's sort of the first major image that I can remember.
Okay, so you get this an image of, say, what you would normally see walking through the front door to start a shift, or just coming to visit.
It's 7 a.m. or something.
Here it is. And what you saw, what first caught your eye is the owner, who's a friend of yours, your old boss, and he's in his usual place, standing next to the coffee making machine.
Right.
But he's got this, as you describe it, almost like a caricature or comical view of what an old person would be. Now, how old was he in real life? Was he older than you?
Oh, I actually don't know his No, we were around the same age. So maybe he was a couple of years older than me at the time. So I was probably mid-20s then, and I would say he'd be like 28, 29. So now, given it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess 33, 34, something like that. But at the time, he was sort of 28, 29.
Okay. Did you have a sense of him looking up to him a little bit at that time, of like him being a little bit older, a little bit wiser, almost like in the anime style, like a senpai, someone who's gonna hold you, take care of you, teach you things?
Honestly, not at all. Not at all. Like, I don't mean this in a rude way, but I didn't feel that whatsoever.
Sure.
It might sound a little bit rude potentially, but he felt like he was. I felt that he was quite a stressed out guy. I felt that he was quite unhappy with the work. We were really sort of under the pump of this job and super busy. He was managing the place. I didn't feel, in fact, I felt almost the opposite. I was not envious of him whatsoever. I could see that he wasn't the healthiest dude either. But he was smoking a lot. He was a little bit overweight. I remember thinking his skin didn't look good a few times. He looked like he was super stressed and super unhealthy generally. So yeah, I definitely didn't feel that.
Okay. There's a possible connection there suggested itself to my mind, is that if you're going to come back after some time, that all of this stress that you're describing, your mind might imagine it had aged him almost to that comical point, place of like, you can't miss the significance of that, to see it as the gray hair, the stoop, the skin, everything is all at once. Like, oh, you're in bad shape. Even though a very little time has passed, like there's something to that of like, you could play it for comedy, but you can also play it straight in terms of like people just wear down over time and wear down faster than they should. If it resonates with you, we'll get to that. But that's kind of how my brain works. I'm like, why that image?
Yeah,
and maybe it relates
some people's life, they age ridiculously rapidly when potentially they shouldn't.
And you also noticed that it was only mildly busy. So in terms of like really busy, it's hectic. There's a lot of people are running around as fast as they can, but this is just like kind of a slow crowd. There's not that many people, but the service is still really bad. It's whatever's happening, it's still being done poorly.
Right. That's right. I worked in sort of hospitality, so many years. So I guess I have this feeling in my head of what a busy day is. And I think most people have that, when you walk into a cafe or a restaurant and there's that like loud buzzing noise of people walking, dishes being put down, talking, things like that hum in the background. That wasn't really there. It was kind of like the cafe was at half capacity. There was a handful of people waiting for their coffee. It wasn't like empty, but it certainly wasn't like a busy day.
Yeah, so it wasn't empty. It wasn't packed. It was a moderate amount of people that probably should have been dealt with a lot easier than it was. And when you talk about things being done, you were saying bad service by the staff. Was it they were performing poorly in terms of, what am I trying to say? Like unskillfully, or did it seem inattentive in terms of like they just didn't care? They weren't getting around to people very fast. How would you describe it?
I think it wasn't necessarily that they didn't care. It wasn't that they were maybe the bad workers necessarily. They were just unskilled workers, kind of like you were saying. Like things were being dropped. Again, anyone who's ever worked in a restaurant or anything knows that this staff member can do 10 different things in 5 minutes, whereas this one could do one thing in 10 minutes, for example. And it was kind of like so inefficient, so lethargic. He was sort of running around trying to do more things with the person working at the register. The person cleaning the tables weren't doing the proper job. It was more just the wheels were not greased. Okay.
So it seemed like the boss was working harder to make up the slack.
Honestly, when I worked with him, he would work a lot anyway. Like he'd always be dashing back and forth between doing different things. And it was kind of like he was doing that a lot. Yeah, he was doing that maybe more than he would have when I was working.
Gotcha. Did you have an experience of coworkers back at the time that they just weren't very good at their job? Is that kind of consistent with the way it played out in the dream?
No.
Or was that unusual to see that? Yeah.
I didn't actually work at this job for very long, and that's why I was surprised to have such a heavy dream about it.
Yeah.
Certainly, in the past, working in restaurants, working in cafes, I've had experiences with like you look at the roster, or I don't know what you call it in North America, like that you sort of schedule a timetable of who you're working with, and you see you're working with this person, you're like, oh, that's going to be a rough night.
I've had that experience in working in psychology too, you know, on a shift at a psychiatric unit, and you'll get some people who are, they're just unskilled, shall we say, and you know there's probably going to be something you're going to have to help them with or pick up after them, or you just hope they don't drop something irreplaceable. Right. Speaking of, go ahead.
It wasn't necessarily that they were the other workers in the cafe were sort of characters to me. They would just copy and paste any sort of unskilled, slow, lethargic, get up and go work up from any cafe or restaurant and paste them into that situation. That's kind of what it was like.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's a very nice kind of iconic representation too. Is okay, it's this type of person. And very often, like if I asked you to say, could you describe what they were wearing or what their face looked like, you'd be like, no, because your brain never filled in those details because it didn't need it. It was, you understand who this is and what they maybe not what they represent, but you get enough of the idea of them that's as focused as it needs to be. And that's perfectly fine. When you said they were dropping things, did they drop anything specific? Like someone dropped the tray, someone dropped a full coffee cup when they were handing it to someone. Did anything jump to mind?
It wasn't that I was necessarily conscious of things being dropped. It wasn't like it was a big dramatic moment where a coffee cup dropped and milk went everywhere. I do remember some of the milk jugs being dropped in the dream, because that would happen all the time at a coffee shop, and it was always such a pain to have to mop up the milk and whatever else. I do remember that occurrence. It was more like the recognition of the sound. You know when it's happened to all of us in a restaurant, and maybe a waitress or a waiter drops a tray or a plate, and it's like that jarring, sharp sound, and like the whole restaurant goes quiet for just those 3 seconds until they realize what happened. It was kind of like that occurring way too repetitively than what should be.
Okay. So you don't remember, say, a particular sequence of a person, a place, a time, a reaction, but you just knew that was happening around you. Yeah. It was just the overwhelming feel of sort of like a chaotic place. It wasn't actually anything specific. Yeah, fair enough. Again, that kind of, if your brain's not filling in the details, it's like you understand enough of this situation. It's like, I talk too much. Sometimes I should just say, you get the point and move on. And that's what your brain was doing in this episode. Not going to belabor it. And how did it transition from or was there a transition? Sometimes there's a jump cut in dreams where you're watching one thing and now you're over here, and it's your brain again doesn't need to fill in the details. It's like, I've shown you everything you need to see to set the stage. Now we're going to edit and move over. Was there a visible experience of transition, or you're in the shop and you're by the river?
Yeah, there really wasn't. I remember sort of discussing the idea of going to the river with him. So it was certainly on the cards. We're going to have a coffee together or whatever. I remember him going to the back to sort of grab his things, and I remember sort of the emotion of walking towards the exit. But then it was like suddenly we were sitting by the river and finding a place, sort of finding a good place to go by the river to sit down. It was very sudden. I don't remember any transport to get from Melbourne city centre to the river, for example. Sure.
Yeah, and that again, if your brain left it out, not a relevant part of the story. So I do what I call, people are probably sick of hearing me say this over and over again. I do a lot of rattling doorknobs. I'm like, does this door come open? It doesn't. We move on. But you got to check. You never know. And I'm glad I did on that one, because there was that element, and you probably, either forgot it or in the retelling, you're like, maybe this isn't a really important detail, but there was you had to wait, and you had to talk to him first about going to have the coffee, and then he had to go and fetch his things, and then as you were leaving together, the jump cut happens.
Yes.
Do you remember speaking to him about anything specific? Like, I want to catch up with you. It's been a while. I want to talk to you about something important. Do you remember telling him something or having him say something to you about going to have a coffee together?
So I remember that the motive was more coming from him. So I remember that it wasn't me like asking, "Oh, do you have some free time or something?" I remember that I was waiting there a long time to get my coffee. I remember I eventually got my coffee. I don't remember a specific him saying, "Oh, do you want to go drink or something like that?" I just remember me having to think about my plans for the day to sort of, if I had time, if that makes sense. I remember the motive coming from him sort of directing and telling me that he was getting off soon or whatever else. And then us from there, us making the decision to go do it. It certainly wasn't me thinking, "Oh yeah, I want to have a coffee with this person, I'm going to ask this person." It definitely wasn't that.
Okay, good. I'm glad I asked too. So it was more like he invited you, but when you got there, you were kept waiting. Things were, and you were kept waiting maybe specifically because things were being poorly run and he was so busy. But finally,
Right.
And you even looked at the clock like, I don't know if I'm going to have time for this. And then eventually he was ready. And then that brought you to, now you're sitting at the riverside. And I don't know that the physical description of the river is necessary, but like, just to give me a better idea, what were you sitting on? How high above the water were you? Was there a bridge nearby? What could you see on the other bank? How wide was it? Just a little picture of that.
Right. So anyone who's been to Melbourne will tell you that most of the river's pretty horrible. It's not really nice. There's some nicer areas of the river, but for the most part, it's like a very built-up kind of like city. And there's maybe some cafes near the river, but nowhere directly next to the river. And then the rest of it is kind of just like grass and mud that goes into the river. There's not really anywhere specifically nice. And I remember this part being, I remember having a view of like the south bank of Melbourne, but typically you'd have no chance of being able to sit there, by the way, because there's too many restaurants and barricades and walls and things like that. I remember having that view of the south bank of Melbourne as if I could sit there, and then it being kind of like, this is going to be a little hard to explain, but do you know when next to a river or even a canal, it's like a very direct concrete corner?
Yeah.
Right. So it goes directly into the water, and it's a concrete corner. And then I would say about maybe, let's say, a couple of meters or 6 feet down is where the water starts. That's where we ended up sitting, on this very direct concrete corner, looking down at the water that was, I guess, an extra meter or 3-4 feet below us.
Okay. So it wasn't, you weren't sitting on a bench at a nice place, and there wasn't any railing either. You're dangling legs over the edge of a concrete block, and the water is right there in front of you. Okay. Totally.
And I remember it being weird because the view that I had is a very specific view of Melbourne South Bank. You can see the casino there. You can see some of the beautiful restaurants. There's some nice trees and stuff on the opposite side of the bank. And I was sitting on the other side of the bank, which actually there, literally in Melbourne, is a big train station. There's nowhere where you can sit there, but for some reason was kind of nothing there in the dream, and I was just able to sit there.
So you were even aware of that, like almost simultaneously with the knowledge that you're sitting there with him, and this is the scene that's in front of you. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but what comes to mind when you think of that South Bank of Melbourne? What any free association, like that's an iconic image in your mind representing something. Otherwise you would have been somewhere else.
Right. Off the top of my head, I would say maybe that really is it's just like the picture of Melbourne for me. You know, that's like almost like the heart of Melbourne, the heart of the nicer side of Melbourne. It's a very nice view. It's a very nice area around there, and that really does have an association just with being in Melbourne, like the very core of Melbourne. I don't necessarily get other emotions as opposed to like that is. I know that is Melbourne straight away. If that makes sense. Sure.
Yeah. And that could be the extent of it in terms of like, just to fix you in a location. You know, it didn't show you the Taj Mahal. You're not, that's not where you were. You are in, and that's your home city. Right. That's where you live.
So Yes and no. Like it's a bit of a strange question, which I know it shouldn't be, especially maybe because I live in Korea. It makes it more confusing. But I was born in the UK, moved to Australia when I was quite young, so I was about 9 years old. We moved around a little bit, but I would say the majority of my adult life has been in Melbourne, and that's where I went to university as well. So I was in Melbourne from the age of like 21 to 27, something like that.
Okay. And then moved to Korea relatively recently, or just a few years back?
Yes, relatively recently. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. Yeah. So this is representing a particular time in your life. It's like whatever idea you're processing, whatever your brain's puzzle is trying to put together, it said, think of being in this place at this time of your life. And that sets the stage. It puts the context to the question you're asking yourself, or the
right.
I like to use a lot of analogies because hell if I know what I'm doing or what it means, but it's like I say, connecting the dots. I say putting the puzzle pieces together. It's making your brain's telling yourself a story about an idea that you haven't formed fully. And then when you form it, and that's why a lot of these dream analyses help people with recurring nightmares get past it. Like if we can identify the elements and what the brain is trying to understand, and then get the waking mind to understand it, it'll very often stop the nightmares, because that's what they're trying to. They're like screaming out a warning, and you're not not understanding it. But as soon as you understand it, the brain's like, finally, I don't have to do this anymore, and it just stops. So anyway, that's the general idea. So you're sitting there, and going back to my notes, do you remember much of anything happening before you dropped the cup? Was there a piece of conversation going? Do you remember sitting down, or you just appeared sitting in your mind, legs dangling? How did that kind of happen?
So I remember the moment immediately before we sat down. So I remember, do you know when you're having a picnic or something like that, you walk into the area, and then everyone's sort of analyzing the terrain, trying to find the best place to sit. We were kind of doing that. We were saying, we were sort of looking up and down the bank, and then I remember the moment just before we sat down, going, oh, that's a good spot. And then we sat down on the edge of the river with our legs sort of over the side. And I don't remember really anything happening directly. I remember just talking. I remember we were talking for a while. Then we were talking for a good long while before coffee cup was dropped. But I don't remember any of the content of the conversation, nor any of the sort of emotion that I felt during talking.
Okay. Do you remember having a sense of who was doing most of the talking? Like, was he telling you things? Like, apparently he'd invited you, like he had something he wanted to say. Was he communicating, like, and you were mostly listening?
He was certainly talking more than me. He definitely was. I remember he was telling me a lot about the coffee shop in general. Just talking about like what's been hard, what's been easy, what's not going well. Specifically with the coffee shop, I don't remember anything of his life, maybe telling me about his life, but I remember him talking about the ins and outs of the coffee shop. And the conversation was relatively even, but he was definitely directing the conversation and talking the most.
Okay. So that is kind of interesting too. And I'm making little carrots as we go along. So what he wanted to communicate to you, and whatever he represents in the dream is trying to communicate, is something, it's talking to you at that moment about focus on this, look at the business, look at how things are going. The elements that were hard, the elements that were easy, the things that were going well or not going well. And you seem to be giving and taking, but yeah, as you say, he's very much directing this conversation. So there's something in your mind is like, when this type of person is telling me something, or this type of content I should be listening to, otherwise you would have been doing most of the talking, or he would have talked about something else. So there's something in there. Yeah. Just to kind of prime your mind a little bit when we come back around to it, in a minute. And do you remember anything that happened immediately preceding the coffee cup being dropped? Like he was talking about something in particular, something else happened, you noticed something else, you had some other experience. Usually there's a trigger for a behavior.
I'm trying to think back. I don't remember the content of his conversation. I do remember feeling mildly like exhausted, kind of over the conversation, if that makes sense, and mildly, not aggressively so, but I remember just being like, I remember feeling and recognizing that we'd probably been sitting there for a couple of hours talking, and I remember, that's about it. I don't remember a specific conversation topic at that point. I remember just being a tiny bit exhausted and uncomfortable kind of thing, and kind of over it. I don't actually remember, which is a strange bit, how the coffee cup was dropped, which I think is a strange bit. I don't really remember how it happened.
That honestly was going to be my next question is how were you gesturing? It flew out of your hand. Was it sitting next to you and you bumped it? Was it sitting between you? Or, and sometimes there's nothing, and that's fine. If there's nothing, that's a door that may never come open. But, like I said, that idea of a trigger, what happens right before it was, this realization that I don't want to be listening to this anymore. I'm not really enjoying this experience, or I've given this guy enough of my time. There's some sense of being over it, done with it. Like this needs to stop. And then in the dream, something happens that interrupts the scene, and that's the coffee cup being dropped.
Yeah. The coffee cup wasn't down. I was actually like, through the entirety of the dream, I was remembering carrying both the coffee cups, like one in each hand. I wasn't stacking them. I didn't take a little bag or something like that. I was holding each coffee cup in my hands, each separate hand. And even when I was sitting there, it was weird because we were talking for a couple of hours apparently, but we didn't take a sip of coffee this time.
Yeah.
Apparently. We hadn't finished our coffee this time. Because I remember feeling like that. And then I remember feeling, okay, it's time to sort of take a sip of the coffee and start drinking the coffee. This bit's the bits of blurry. I remember them being in my hands, but I don't remember if he knocked me. I don't remember if I was messing around with them and trying to move them around. I remember thinking it's time to drink the coffee. One of the coffee cups got dropped in the water.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, that's great imagery too. So there was this almost an annoyance, but at least an exhaustion. Like you've given this as much as you can, and you went to then. Right. And I completely forgot that you're holding two coffee cups and one of them was extra. Just to bounce back a little bit, did you remember receiving the cups before you left the store in the first place?
Totally I did. Okay. And I remember we also had like a mild discussion about the fact that, here's the next extra one for service, because it would happen all the time in the coffee shop where, like, I don't know, maybe we had an extra shot of coffee that wasn't perfect, so we were going to throw it out anyway, and we just put a little bit of milk in it. Oh, here, you can drink that. We'll give it to the kitchen staff. We'll give it to one of the waitresses or something. And it's kind of like a shot of coffee for a bit of a boost during the day. And it was one of those. It was definitely one of those because, that's something that we did. But taking the two coffee cups, even though one was entirely full and one was like just an inch of coffee at the bottom of the cup, I don't remember. They both just felt like two normal cups of coffee. One didn't feel extremely light or cold or something like that. Even though I realized that they weren't equal.
Okay. Do you remember who handed it to you? Did your boss come out of the back and hand them to you as you're leaving?
He definitely did.
He did.
He definitely
did.
Yeah.
Good deal.
He gave me the coffees before he got his stuff.
Before, say again?
Got me the coffees. He gave me the coffees before he went to the back to go grab his jacket and grab his wallet and things.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's maybe an interesting sequence. Sometimes there's so many of these little details, I lose them. And I almost completely screwed up forgetting about the cups. There is something significant here. There's something going on with two things that look identical and feel identical, but one of them's only half full, and then half full is an extra, but you can't tell the difference between them easily by sight, by weight. And the idea that you're holding on to both of them this whole time, and then when you go to take a drink, the one you're going to take a drink from is apparently this full one, but you didn't think it was because it slipped and fell in, or was it the one in the other hand that fell in? Do you not remember?
I actually have no idea which one I went to drink. I had no idea which one I was trying to drink.
Fair enough. And that might be significant as well. You couldn't tell the difference, didn't know which one.
Right.
And then was it the one you went to drink from that fell? Can't remember.
I don't know again.
I don't know. That's okay.
I don't know. There's like a chunk, there's a gap between where I had the recognition I'm going to take a sip of coffee and then me realizing that the coffee cup is just dropped into the water and seeing there's no sort of information between that space.
Yeah, and there's two possibilities there. One is that you forgot. What are you going to do? Sometimes dream images aren't sharp enough to stay with us.
Right.
Or it's missing on purpose. What was significant is that it was given to you, and this mysterious nature of these seemingly identical but very different things. You brought it with you to this conversation.
Right.
And it was when you went to take a drink that something happened that you don't know. And that chunk might be missing on purpose, like it's jumped over. All you know is the result of this sequence of events was one of the cups dropped. And your first thing was, oh, well, that sucks. The extra bit is gone. I had a kind of freebie thing that was just gratis. Something extra. There's a better word for it, but and you were okay with it because you're like, well, it was free anyway, so
right.
I'm not out.
No big deal.
I'm not out anything. No big deal. How long? And that happened almost at the same time it was falling. That thought. Or it hit the water?
It was, it definitely hit the water. But I remember the realization of what fully had. Do you know when you drop something, it's like you're in that moment of like a shock kind of thing? I remember feeling that, the fumbling moment, and then the splash, and then it's sort of bobbing under the water, then coming up to the surface a little bit, and then going, oh, whoops, I dropped the coffee cup, having the realization of what had occurred.
Do you remember your boss, having a reaction to it at all, or your attention completely shifted and you're watching this scene with the cup play out?
Yeah, no, I can't remember him at all in that moment, really.
Okay. Yeah, so whatever was happening with that was more important. He'd served his purpose up to that point, and maybe obviously he did come back around to it, but now your attention is on this cup. It hits the water, it kind of bobs a bit, and then the lid comes off, and that's when you realize that's the one, that's the full one.
So I remember the coffee cup actually was going with the tide, the stream, quite far. And I remember still being in that spot and sort of seeing the scene of Melbourne behind it and it going quite far. And me processing what had occurred, being okay with it. And then sort of, a coffee cup is like that plastic lid. The plastic lid sort of popped open. And like very vivid part, I remember, when you pour milk into black coffee and it's all that swirling sort of chaos, like quite a pretty picture. I remember all of the coffee sort of swirling into the river. And I remember seeing like so much of it, so much coffee coming out of it. And that's when I realized that it was the full cup.
Do you remember the quantity coming out being more than should have been in the cup? And now that you think about it, was it like, there's no way I should have seen that, or it spread out way too far? I
don't remember it being excessive, but I remember having the recognition in my head that, that's definitely not the almost empty cup, because there's so much coffee coming out. It wasn't like I was shocked, oh my god, there shouldn't be that much coffee. It was more, wow, there's a lot of coffee, so it must be the full cup. But I do vividly remember just coffee just streaming and streaming and streaming out, and sort of all these swirling patterns in the river.
Now, did it float down towards anything specific? Like, was it directly underneath a bridge when it popped open? Was it directly across from a specific building when it popped open?
There was no specific buildings. It was definitely still in that view that I've told you about of Melbourne South Bank, sorry. There was no specific buildings. There was no bridge. My attention was really just focused on the water at that point. I wasn't really thinking so much about the view, although I do remember the view being there. My recollection was just of the coffee just streaming out.
And it was at that point that your emotions about it changed. You're like, now you go from mild annoyance, the freebie's gone. You're like, no, now the main thing is gone. And you went more towards an angry space with it, or I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Right. It was like a really quick change. It wasn't like I slowly was steaming up to it. It was like it suddenly hit me that it was the other one. And I started feeling really upset, like angry at myself. Like, God, so stupid. How did I think about how it happened? And that's when sort of the process of emotions started. That like a train started thinking about the cost of it and the waste of it. Started thinking about maybe it was the guy's fault, not my fault. I wasn't actually sure whose fault it was. I don't remember there being any. I don't remember how it happened, so I'm not sure whose fault it was. But I do remember thinking it was my fault. Then I remember thinking it was his fault. I remember being upset. And I remember being angry. It was like all these different emotions.
And what was kind of strongest to your mind was the idea of the waste, the expense, that something of value was being lost.
Absolutely. It wasn't even necessarily like, you know, when you pay for something that's expensive, but you kind of need it and you kind of want it. For example, something that you just always wanted, I don't know, maybe buying a new laptop or something like that. It sucks because it's so expensive, but it's kind of cool because you have a new laptop. It's fun.
Yeah.
I remember just utter waste, just utter complete, like I've just taken a handful of cash and thrown it out the window. Complete, have nothing to show for it. Complete burnt my money. That's the feeling. I also hate that feeling when I do that sometimes. Sometimes I have situations where, you know, if for example, I'm having to pay for a new passport, and Australian passports are unbelievably expensive. I've only just found out this week how expensive they are. And I kind of have that feeling now because they cost, in US dollars, because I have to get it here, probably like $340 US. Wow. I need to spend on this passport. And it's really like, I'm trying not to think about it because I have to get it.
That's
but
brutal.
It's that feeling of like, it's so brutal. And I'm just throwing the money. There's so much I could have done with that money.
Now, I would normally wait to do this, but at what point relative to knowing you need to buy a passport did this dream happen? I mean, are you getting a connection there or way before?
No.
Okay.
No.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I've only just found out about this passport this week, and I had this dream, I would say, 3 months ago.
Okay, gotcha. Because that's one of the things we'll do is go, what was happening in your life at the time, and I mean that could have been a direct connection there, but we've got a little visitor. This is the shy one. Hi, daughter. Oh, she's coming.
Yeah, I
look at her. Yeah, she's
running
around in the background
behind you. Yeah.
This one hides in the closet. She wants to be in a small space away from everybody. She doesn't want to be held.
Introverted.
Yeah. She's so we I mean, complete tangent, but we my parents. So I'm in Portland, Oregon. Used to live in Southern Oregon. I moved up here. My folks were still living down there at the time, and they found this kitten in the bushes crying. No mother, nothing. Like had to be hand fed, and this was her. And so she's just been poorly socialized, traumatized from a very young age, and it always makes me feel really good. Where I'm like laying in bed, and all of a sudden she appears, and she cries a little, and she comes over, and if I just hold my hand still, she'll rub on it, and that's the best I get. She's never gonna let me hold her and pet her and cuddle her, but
quite a big marker of trust.
Those are those moments. Like it's just I get a little verklempt, you know. I'm like, oh, she feels
sweet.
safe for just a moment. Yeah, I love that. I love that. And that takes a tremendous consistency. I get to feel good about myself too. Is like I have behaved properly. I have put myself together and presented myself in a way she's able to have those moments, even if they don't last. And that's the thing of beauty. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's strange with animals like that. You know, in Korea, there's a lot of stray cats, and some of them are like wild cats, like they're aggressive and they have nothing to do with the people and things like that. And there's one down the street that it's in sort of a big block of apartments, but it's definitely a street cat. But it's like the most placid, animal ever. And I guess it gets fed and things like that, sort of changes its emotion. But it's always just like hanging out with the school kids and like hanging out with little people exercising and things like that. And it's like, what has happened? Obviously, maybe the other cats.
Yeah.
Worse things occur to them, I don't know, but still, it's quite a funny contrast.
It's that nature-nurture thing, because there's a temperament, too, of being maybe a little mistrustful, and then one bad thing happens, they're like, I'm done with all you people. Literally, people in general. And then, but it's also nice that maybe this other cat had, you're saying like a little more laid-back attitude, and maybe some mildly uncomfortable things happen, but not enough to scare it off. But there's something else going on there, too, with this cat has exposure to so many people, and there's such a uniform love and kindness coming from them. This cat feels so comfortable around everyone. That means that every other person, or even 1 out of 10, isn't coming along and smacking her in the face.
Or, kicking it or whatever,
right? Because that would change. That attitude would change pretty quick. So there's something beautiful in that community, too, where this stray animal is just getting random love for people that and I mean, we get our positive feedback from being nice to animals, but there's people who don't. But to have a complete lack of that, even if those people exist, they're not expressing it because the community is that strong. That's the thing of beauty too. I love that.
Definitely.
Anyway, I can ramble on these things. We were just getting down to trying to nail down some of the, and that's there is something very, and we'll come back around to very significant in there with the feeling of you're angry because of this waste, this loss, this something of value is gone, and it's to no purpose. There's it's one thing to sacrifice money for something you need and you get but it's just a burnt, you said, like burning money. There's no point to it. It does nothing for you. You get nothing out of it. It's just a complete waste. So there's maybe focus, not focus, but meditate on that a little bit as we just finish up. And that's when you started thinking, is it my fault? Wait a minute, I don't know what happened. Maybe it's his fault. And you started expressing that, and you said you were actually screaming at him at one point. It was, How would you describe kind of how that played out?
I remember blaming him in a way that I had a specific reason why I blamed him, but I don't remember the specific reason. And like you said, maybe I forgot, or maybe it's not important. But I remember sort of telling him, this is what happened. This is why it's your fault. And I remember constantly, like a metronome, like flicking back and forth, thinking, no, it was my fault. No, it was his fault. But still, regardless, I was screaming at him, telling him it was his fault. I don't really remember the specific things that I said to him, other than I know I had a reason why I was blaming him. And I just, when you get angry and you feel hot, I was feeling that heat. I was feeling the hot anger, and I was directing it at him. And again, he wasn't really saying anything to me. I don't even really remember his actions. He was just kind of like a statue at that point. My anger was just being directed at, while simultaneously in my head I was flicking back and forth between whose fault it actually was.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question too. Is like, how did he take it? Did he go, now hold your horses, bucko? Did he say, it might have been my fault? But you're saying he was kind of stoic. He was just there like screaming at a rock, unresponsive.
Yeah, I don't even remember him saying anything. I don't even remember his face at that point, actually. I remember literally just him being the figure that I was yelling. Yeah. And I actually don't even remember what he was looking like. I don't know what his facial expressions were like. I don't even necessarily really remember if he was doing anything. I just remember standing up. I was stood up at this point. He was stood up also, and me turning towards him on this riverbank, and me just screaming at him.
And then that was kind of the final scene your brain retained from that experience, was screaming at him, standing up, gesturing, moving away from the water. Yeah.
Lots of gesturing. We were we stood up, we're standing by the bank. I think we were slowly sort of getting away. That was the last thing. I don't remember anything else of significance after that.
Okay. That is perfectly fine. I'm just going to make a little note here. 49:16. So, like 5 minutes to go through the dream in the beginning, three minutes even. And now like 45 minutes to go back through for the details. And that always happens. Right. Yeah. This is the process. One of these days, I hope, maybe I never can. Maybe this is the way it's supposed to be done. Maybe this is the only way I can do it. Maybe I lack the skill, but I would like it if someday people could just tell me the dream. I can write down the details and I can start putting it together. And I've done that with a couple of people. I don't know why. It just worked that time. Maybe it was I had a clearer understanding right off the bat. I don't know.
Right.
But usually I got to go through this second phase to really get into it and get more, because there was a lot more there than you described the first time, a lot more than you knew. There always is.
Yeah.
This is now what, episode 44, I think, doing 44 of these and dozens more over my lifetime. My process has been the same for like 20, 25 years almost.
I guess it's dependent on the person too, in terms of how they dream, because I was actually going to say to you, this is interesting for me doing this because I would consider myself a very active sleeper in the way that I sleep talk a lot, I sleepwalk a lot, I dream very regularly, I have very emotional dreams, I have a bunch of dreams that sort of recur with a similar theme. Get sleep paralysis extremely regularly as well, and even my father, he sleepwalked all the time. So, and I always have these very strange dreams as well that I don't really remember much of. So I know that's like that for me, but when I speak to other people about dreams, sometimes they don't dream very regularly, or at least they don't remember it. And when they do, it's this very like clinical, clean dream that they remember like the tiniest details of. And I'm like, that's not how I dream at all.
Yeah, no, I've been everyone, even the people I've talked to where like their just dream description was 10, 15 minutes long, we still got more out of it than they were able to say in that walkthrough.
Right.
Again, they didn't think it was important. They didn't remember until they didn't remember until I asked. And then they go, oh, now that you mention it, I can see exactly what you're asking for. That's pretty common too. This is interesting too, because I was thinking of making, I don't know, I'm always thinking like, what should I do for a video? Should I just do random stuff? Should I stick with this? I was going to make a little video today saying I had a dream last night. Don't remember it, but I remember that I had one. And I typically just don't remember my dreams or don't dream at all. I assume I do dream, but it's very rare that I remember that I even had a dream, and I couldn't tell you a single thing about it. I just know that it happened. I know I woke up remembering, I was having a dream. And before I could reach over for a pad and pencil next to the bed, just gone. Yeah. Right. So I'm a little bit, so part of me loves doing this is like living vicarious. Like, what's it like to remember your dreams? And then people tell me, but also
tell me your stories about the dreams.
Exactly. Tell me about your home world, Usul.
Yeah, it's funny.
Dune fans out there. So speaking of dreams, getting back to your dream and trying to make sense of it. This is into part 3. Before I start making suggestions, I know I brought your attention to little stuff along the way that where I was making my little carrots. I like to ask people, did you have any new understandings, sudden insights, connections that were coming to your mind as you were telling it, as we were discussing some of those details? What's your maybe new impression now that you've kind of been through my little question and answer process?
Well, as you had mentioned, like what happens with other guests as well, I definitely remember things better now we've spoken about it, especially because it's been sort of part-wise, like in chunks, and it gets a bit richer, and the images are sort of coming back to my head. That's certain. Nothing new has come to mind, apart from some of the details, but no sort of new conclusions or anything have come to mind, except from I certainly remember more clearly the feelings I felt within the dream. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And it's very common. And this is the moment where I put people on the spot. They go, all right, what do you think it means before and then they're like, I don't know. That's why I'm here talking to you. I'm like, well, I don't know either. We're going to figure something out. I do that though, to not to taint people's understanding with my own right off the bat. Yeah. I want to just, okay, first impression, nothing, not a big deal. But some of those things, so that's when I go back through my notes and I start looking for the what I call the carrots I made, and there is, so let's see, broad strokes of the idea of, like I was saying, to put you back, or your mind, the idea you're considering seems to be related to this period of time, the experience you had there, or some some ideas being represented by starting you off. Okay, this is the place, this is the time, and specifically your experience at the shop, and taking you through to. There also seems to be a theme of business in a way. Business is maybe the wrong way to do it, but well executed skill to benefit
operation.
Yeah, things operating functionally. Before I get too far down that road, I did want to ask, at the time when you had this dream, do you remember any significant events you had just experienced or you knew were right around the corner? Sometimes those things are related. I'd like to throw it out just in case.
So I will say that I've had the last sort of few months have been quite strange, and maybe significant or maybe not, but I'll tell you anyway. So because of many people's lives have changed because of COVID in general, of course.
Yeah.
But with me specifically, maybe a lot of the people listening might know the Australian government has been they've done a good job of controlling COVID. Life is basically normal there, but they're taking some massive liberties with, I guess, some people's freedoms and a lot of other issues. And because I live here in Korea, they have basically halted all flights to Australia, including citizens coming home. So there are 40,000 Australians stuck overseas right now, 40,000 who cannot get home. Some of them are homeless, some of them don't have jobs, some of them haven't seen their families in Australia for a year. I mean, there's a story, for example, of a guy that went to the UK in March to see his dying father. Hasn't been able to get home since, has no work. For me specifically, I can't get home. I tried to get home because I got into medical school. I was meant to be starting medical school in January. Haven't been able to get home. So around in December last year, I had to move to a new city in Korea. I started a new contract. I'm now in that new city right now. And I had this dream. I would say I wrote it down. I had this dream in January. I had this dream in late January. So these last few months have been odd in general because it's always odd moving to a new city. I wasn't expecting to be in Korea right now, but I still am in Korea and I have a year-long contract, so I'll be here at least till the end of the year.
Okay. So those were kind of the general circumstances. There was, during the time of COVID, as they'll say, someone will write a book about that eventually. Travel restrictions and issues. You were supposed to go home, couldn't get home. And it was specifically, you were supposed to start medical school in Australia. And that got interrupted. And all of this was going on at about the time the dream happened. So there could be a connection. I mean, thinking of it from that angle specifically, those events, that frustration, does anything in the dream come to mind? Did any image from the dream come back to you as you were telling me about those events? It did or it didn't, but...
I mean, certainly, I mean, nothing that I would say, oh yeah, that's the thing for sure.
Yeah.
However, money has definitely been in my mind, as it is with a lot of people, because I'm trying to obviously, this year, because medical school has been delayed, I'm really trying to save so I can have a good chunk of cash behind me when I start medical school next year. But I mean, that's not like, I mean, that's not unusual. You know what I mean? It's not, I've never been a person who's ridiculously stressed about money like maybe some others are. I've kind of been in a camp where money's there to be spent. I'm trying to save as much as I can when I can, but I'm not overly stressed about it. And even though I'm saving for something specific, that hasn't necessarily changed, although I am trying to save for something specific.
Fair enough. Yeah, something that leaped to my mind was the idea of being the waste can be like a wasted opportunity, like a plans frustrated, something taken from. So possible connection. It may not be very strong, but it may be part of a pattern that might take us somewhere else. But the idea of the opportunity being this cup dropped the opportunity to go to medical school, the plans of your future, and you're trying to judge, well, did I make a mistake, say leaving the country and going to Korea? Did I get myself stuck here, or are these powers beyond my control overreacting and frustrating my plans? There could be something there. It could be related to something else. Sometimes it's like specific life events you're going through come out in the dream because you're trying to figure out, how do I feel about this? How do I make sense of it? And sometimes it's like not related to anything. It's these broader philosophical, metaphysical things people are contemplating, trying to, contemplating their navel type of questions in their dreams. It's like, well, how do I make sense of this idea in general, unrelated to anything else? So I don't know if that idea of wasted potential.
It could be something along those lines. I mean, this year is very strange for me in general because it does feel like a bit of a not wasted year. That's not the correct word, but like it feels like I'm so overcooked. Because as you're probably aware, getting into medical school is such a long process, and for me it was like almost 2-year process, longer than that if you include like university beforehand and things like that. And for me, I had to take the test for a second time, the entrance exam. I had to fly to Australia before the virus to take the test. It was so much decisions and money was put into getting into medical school. Excuse me. And then, the process to get home was really like bumpy and ugly. So it's not that they've closed the borders. They've basically just said, we're only letting this amount of people in. And this has led to a situation in which flights are constantly cancelled, depending on how many people have already gone into Australia. It's leads to a situation in which only 20 people are being flown on a Boeing 747 from Singapore, for example. And it was me like really trying hard to find flights, contacted the Singaporean embassy, contacted the embassy here in Seoul, and it does feel like I'm so overcooked because I was so ready to begin medical school. Like I really, really was. And this year, it's like I feel like I'm just looking at my watch every day. Is it time to start medical school yet? Is it time to start medical school yet? And obviously, still the situation with the virus is uncertain, and I'm still nervous about how I'm going to get home at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, if we're onto something in general with the life experiences feeding into this dream, some of the other elements will resonate. They'll make sense in that context. So if we go back through some of the other stuff and start trying to line it up there, something you said did remind me of the idea of being kept waiting in the coffee shop and things being poorly managed, and maybe the idea of what was the idea that came to my mind? Without saying, without making any broad assertions about whether certain government agencies have or have not performed well, there can be the perception that this is not the feeling, the frustration of like, if only this were handled better, whatever that means, it would be less frustrating. It would be more efficient. It would not stand in the way, needlessly stand in the way of this process I'm trying to get done. It wouldn't be so complicated. There might be something there with the calling around to try and arrange the flights and the mess of it, the jumble of it all, of these different agencies. And maybe you're talking to people and each individual person has no idea what's going on and they don't understand the policies very well and they can't give you good information. And you're like, for fuck's sake, would someone just please know what is going on and tell me the information I need and I can stop making all these phone calls. I don't know if that experience of being in the coffee shop is relating to that.
Well, it certainly could. I mean, I definitely feel that because everybody I spoke to didn't know anything. And I'm like, I love Australia. I really do. But the way they have treated people overseas has really left me feeling so backstabbed because no one could tell me anything. No one was able to tell me anything. And the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, kept saying we're going to get all Australians back by Christmas. Kept saying things like we're going to get repatriation flights organized. Kept saying things like we're going to create a travel bubble with Korea because Korea has handled the situation very well. So I'm kind of waiting I'm checking the news every few hours. Is this travel bubble going to start? No one could tell me anything. No one could even tell me a proper process in which to get flight. I have known people to be able to get flights because Australia was letting in 1,000 or 2,000 people a week or something like that, which is nothing on a global scale, but that doesn't mean it was possible. And I was just unable to find any direction in which to find flight. And I was in this bizarre situation where I found some flights I was able to book. I've spoken to people in the past on Facebook forums and stuff in my situation who have booked, I'm not kidding, 10, 15, 20 flights. They get cancelled at the last minute because of this cap on people.
Yeah.
They end up with like $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 waiting in refunds. And I was in this situation where my visa here was expiring because you need to work in order to have a visa. But I wasn't unsure if I could get home. So I was in a situation of feeling I might actually be stateless, which would be a horrific situation. And me having to sort of pull the trigger and say, I need to get a new contract, or else I actually might not have any country to live in. So it was so messy and still is disorganized. There's not even a roster system. It's literally like you have to roll the dice and hope that you get a seat on the flight. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, I mean, that could leave you feeling that things are managed less well than they could be. Without pointing any fingers, you're just looking at it going, this isn't working very well. Whatever it is, whoever's fault it is. And that might, that might feed into that a little bit too. But there's also, so you're in this maybe this iconic representation of home from a certain period in your life. You're seeing the place poorly managed, roughly, with the boss, with the person, someone you like, I would say maybe respect, you think they're a good person, stressed out, working very hard, which is consistent with their real life personality, and say doing their best to doing their best, but it isn't good enough. Things are still kind of just barely hanging together, and it's aged him in almost this comical, cartoonish kind of way. And I'm wondering if that's related to, because there is themes of business, finances, not just in a performance sense of like functioning well, but in a sustaining yourself. Like it's this guy's personal business. Like he's the owner. So there's something about owning the responsibility for how things work. Where am I going with that? But no, yeah, but aging up, we may have figured that out in terms of like what would happen to this person. Well, he's going to age faster than he should. He's living a hard life. It's taken its toll on him. But there might be something else in there with the idea that it's so over the top, this representation. Go ahead.
Benjamin, sorry to stop you. I just need to plug in my laptop because the battery's...
Oh, no, that's perfectly fine. I should get up.
In a second?
Yeah, I should get up and stretch my legs. Let me just make a little note here. Ooh, this one's Cece. The other one was Baby, and the first one was Wookie. Oh, and then we got there he is, Prince in the background.
Right.
He's the one that destroyed my episode number 8. I spell it episode ATE 8. He ate it. He sure did. What do we got? 10:33. So it was actually good to take a little break too, because I had a not an epiphany or whatever. Oh, you're good to go? Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. I didn't know. Just checking. Not an epiphany, I guess, but something that I kept thinking that this business owner was someone else, but I think it might be you, or it's something that you are looking at in relation to yourself. So it's not that it represents you, although it does. Everything in your dream does in a way. But there's something like the experience you're having at this time has taken its toll on you. This is aging you in a way that you imagine the stress of that guy was taking a toll on him. You're like, is this what it's like to live with this kind of stress? Now, I'm just throwing that out there. It was just my idea. Does that resonate with you at all about that period of time and the stress you're under?
I don't necessarily feel overly stressed. Like I feel more or less, I feel like I do.
It got a little choppy again at there, but I think I caught most of it. The idea that thinking back on this time, you don't remember it being overwhelmingly stressful. So that's
exactly.
good. There is this sense of in the shop being kept waiting, and this stressed out business person. Maybe there was at least part of your mind that at the time that was thinking, if this goes on too long, I may end up in a more stressful place. But you're managing it well. You got it sounds like you got a lot of good coping skills for it. Is stress is going to happen. We just have to kind of figure out how to manage it, and that can mean minimizing it, or it can mean writing it out with other things we do to balance the load. So, and yeah, we'd mentioned that before too, or I did when I put a little carrot next to it, the idea that you'd been invited back to this place by this representation of this person that had something they needed to tell you, but that you don't remember what it was. But so the important idea seems to be that this person had something to tell you, and that you were listening, but at a certain point you were kind of over it. Like maybe the person was talking too much. Maybe you weren't really interested in what they had to say, or you gave them your ear and you were just tired. You're like, that's enough. But there's something in there as well, about maybe something's demanding your attention. You're willing to give it, but there's a limit to your patience. There's a limit to the amount of time you're going to invest in it based on how important it is. I don't know if something's resonating there with your life experience or in the context of the dream, just phrasing it that way. There was maybe a mental fatigue with the process of listening for a given period of time, and you did have that sense that it went on for quite a while, that you just had enough of that social interaction at that time, and you were getting ready to go. And it was, maybe there seems to be something in there about, I don't know. The thought just occurred to me. I hate to make pronouncements like this is what it means, but there's something there as well as like, maybe there's something in your personality or in your relational style that you've got difficulty with. I actually wrote this down, something about boundaries. There's multiple different boundaries in this one too, but personal experience, it can be hard for me to say goodbye. I never know when I've said it properly or enough, or I don't want to just say, okay, I'm done talking now, goodbye, and turn and walk away. And I mean, that's not the social dynamic we have, but I never know how to do it right. So I have trouble with that boundary of how do you bound a conversation with proper hellos, proper goodbyes. And that goes to a lot of different areas in life too. So I wondered if there were something going along with demands on your time, demands on your energy, demands on your attention, that you're having a hard time, or it's difficult to find the right place to stop. Is that making sense?
So I would say two things that might be of relevance. The first thing was when I left this job that I'm talking about in real life, when I left this job, I was under a casual contract. I was sort of under no obligation to give, 2 weeks resignation period, for example. And I had just found a job that was better. It was higher paying. It was more hours. It was more suitable for what I was doing at the time. And I had to start it very rapidly. So like 2 days, or I think it was 1 day even before my next shift at this job in the dream, I had to text my boss and be like, I'm so sorry, I've appreciated working there. I'm changing jobs now. And they were like, you can't even come in for the last day. I'm like, no, sorry. And they were quite annoyed. There is that. And also tying into that as well, currently I'm having a hard time dealing with time a little bit because I've got so many plates spinning right now. I'm trying to do so many things, which I usually do anyway, but it has been kind of particularly hard this year for a few reasons. First, my new job is a bit more work than the previous one, so I have less time for myself because of that. Second, I'm trying to study some sort of medicine preparation stuff, and I'm wondering how many hours I should do that. Third, I've got the podcast. 4, I'm learning Spanish. There's all these things I'm trying to do.
You do have a lot of plates spinning.
So maybe yes, a lot of plates spinning. For
sure. That might feed into it too, but I want to put that on a back shelf for 2 seconds. Is what I completely forgot this, and that's why I'm glad sometimes my intuitions are completely wrong, but it's trying to remind me of something. It was connected to, now I'm going to forget it because I'm doing too much backstory. It's when you were talking about, I just lost it. It demands on your time. Yeah. When you were talking way back in the beginning, and that's my brain's, I'm always so much in the present. That you had, that this was a rather short period of time. It was very intense. The emotional, say, connection with the situation. You love the people and the place, but it ended abruptly. And now you're describing that again too. And that you might be carrying a little residual guilt over that. Like it happens. You had to take a better opportunity, although you could have chosen not to. So you may be looking at that like, I mean, I could have stayed in a situation that was less ideal for me just to make these people happy, but that wasn't what was good for me. I made that executive decision. You got to, do I stay or do I go? You might be looking back like, I wasn't really, I don't know, there's a lot of things we do that we're not happy about. It was the right thing to do, but that's not, we wish there had been a better way. So you might have been carrying a little bit of that with you to this day. And even to the point of saying, how do I make sure I don't have another situation where I make a similar decision that leaves me with this kind of nagging guilt, even if it isn't major, it's a 2 out of 10 or whatever, but it's enough. It's there. You think about it from time to time. You're not happy about it. And your brain's maybe saying, what could I do to avoid that in the future? So it's reminders coming back in the dream. That was one idea.
I think that's kind of nail on the head in terms of the way I felt about it, because the guilt wasn't large, but it definitely wasn't a nagging guilt, like you just said. I remember as well, again, in real life, when I quit the job, I remember feeling, there was a moment where I know that it's not the best way to leave a job, especially one that's been good to me. There's other ways I can do it. I can give them 2 weeks or whatever, even though I'm under no obligation. It was more like a business decision that I had to do that for myself, and I was under no legal bounds to actually have to stay there and work longer. And I remember I remember being annoyed at his reaction. Also, I remember it was as if like he has completely forgotten. He was sort of disregarding the fact that he had made the decision to not put me on a contract, to give me a casual contract, which allows him to take certain liberties, give me work when he wants. But then he's unhappy when I leave. I remember being kind of annoyed at that this is a business decision. You should you should understand it. And he was quite annoyed by that. Even though we were quite close, I'd worked very well for the few months that I had worked there. And I remember being like a bit like, oof, I don't really like that you would react in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes a little sense too, of you being angry with him in the dream that this dropped cup. There was something more going on there. Like, why 2 cups? Why did you hold them? Why did he hand them to you? Why did you hold them the whole time? Why is it when you went to take a drink, it got dropped? And then this angry reaction with him. So there does seem to be some kind of dynamic going there with this. It was a tragic situation all the way around. And maybe he didn't own his part in the story. So you're going back and forth in your mind. And that seems to make a lot of sense too, of is this guilt I'm feeling really all my fault, or does he have his part in it? And you're kind of remembering, he didn't own it. He didn't own his culpability in that. And damn it, why don't you just let me off the hook and take equal responsibility, and I don't have to feel so guilty anymore. And so you're yelling at him in the dream.
Yeah, that
might be related to it.
Right, totally.
And then it would be maybe what made that kind of come back to your mind at that time, and we're kind of relating it to some of the other stress you were under and the frustrations of goals. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of symbolism that's possible in there. But if you think about it from that perspective of kind of just a nagging, unresolved, minor guilt, where you're like, I wish I didn't have to worry about this anymore, and you have this dream expression of it. What might have been happening in your life that at that moment that brought that back up? Because we don't think about these things every single day, but they come and go. It's something we experience triggers it, and then now I'm thinking about that again. Yeah.
You mean what was happening when I had the dream, or what was happening when I left the job?
Yeah, no, when you had the dream. So it's like, why this dream about this subject at that time? What similar situation were you processing that made your brain want to return to this this situation to analyze it further, to draw some meaning out of it, to give you an understanding that was going to help you address something you were going through, is generally the connection we're looking for.
I mean, it was definitely all of the decisions of trying to get home. Also decisions of whether I should even go home as well, given the fact it's so difficult and I might become stateless if I make the wrong decision. Also, I was having quite a hard time deciding which city I should live in Korea as well. So I was deciding between continuing in the city I was already living in, moving to the city I'm in now, or even going to Seoul as well. Sorry, and I was unsure which city to go to. So maybe that could have been part of it.
And that was also, you said, related to whether you were going to accept a new contract while you were there, because if you did, that's going to mess up sudden opportunities to go home, which is really where you wanted to go. But can you wait and on a wish and a prayer to get home and have no means to sustain yourself? You got all these conflicting. So yeah, when you're unsure about how to make a decision, so that then dreams like this will come back where like, well, here's how you made a similar decision or something similar in the past. And it's trying to say, is it useful to look at this to help you solve that problem? Do you remember coming to some kind of a decision soon after having this dream? You're just like, I got to pick a path. You made a decision and you went for it.
Actually, I would say the opposite, in that I had just made a decision when the dream happened.
Okay.
Yeah, because I basically decided where I was going to live, decided that I was going to stay here, decided I was not going to able to get home, applied for deferral at university, all these things, a few weeks prior to when I had this dream.
Okay. And so that might be relevant as well. This idea that you've committed yourself to a path. It's gone from considering potentials which are remote, and there's something about the future that is distant from us until we get closer to it. But once we make a decision that connects us to an outcome, that outcome might as well be in our face at that moment because we're committed. You can always change your mind, but the idea is your brain treats it like it's already happening because you've chosen that it will happen. So yeah, there may be that the stream came around, you're second guessing yourself a little bit. You're like, wow, this is going to happen. Am I going to be happy with that result? That makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know if it does to you, just that basic idea.
Totally, because I mean, the biggest overwhelming emotion I'm feeling this year, and generally something I have a hard time with, is like FOMO, like fear of missing out. And I'm just drowning in FOMO this year. Maybe I should have moved to Seoul. Maybe I should have just found a way to get back to Australia. Yeah, maybe I went to the wrong city. There's a bunch of different things that I've been thinking of.
When you think about that FOMO and the coffee cups, does something come to mind? I don't know why that brought that image to my mind right away. Just feeling. Yeah, and that's a good way to. You got a little choppy there too, so I'm going to try to paraphrase a little bit there too. But this idea that of feeling the waste of something, and that can be the waste of an opportunity when you're weighing these two things that you're having a hard time making a decision. They feel so similar. You can't tell one from the other instantly. That's where the indecision comes from. And one is half as good as the other, but it wasn't because it wasn't full, but it was also a freebie. So you're not losing anything. And you're like, well, and that's maybe tied up with that idea of did I make the right decision? Did I drop the right cup in this decision-making process? And you looked at it and your brain's going, no, you dropped the wrong cup. But now you're also looking at this iconic representation of someone not taking full responsibility, but you're bouncing back and forth on that too. Was it really my fault, or was it forces beyond my control? Something
it's quite interesting because with my decision making, I feel like with small things, I am so indecisive. Like, I have a hard time deciding, just like, am I going to have like pork for dinner or tofu? Like, stuff like that. I'm really bad. But big decisions, I'm generally like really cutthroat with. That's what I feel. However, when I was deciding to get home and when I was deciding what city to live in, I remember feeling utter frustration because they both felt like I wanted both, kind of thing. And I having a really hard time knowing which one was better. Really difficult time knowing, and especially between the cities, because I love Seoul. I really love Seoul. But I was so uncertain if I would actually be that happy living in Seoul, and maybe I got sick of it after 3 months. And then this city I'm in is quite a small city, which is beautiful and stuff, but it's not Seoul as well. There's so many things I'm missing out on, and I feel frustration with. I remember like thinking about trying to get home. Oh, it'd be great to get home, but I'm going to be in so much debt because of the cost of the flights, because they've been jacked up, right? Because no one can get there. We also must pay for quarantine, which is $3,000. There's all this stuff. And I was like, well, if I stay here, I'm not going to start medical school. I remember feeling like these complete equal decisions and not being able to make a cutthroat decision because there was no sudden winner. And I guess interestingly as well, I really try in those situations to tell myself that there is like ways not to back out, but it's okay to just take a decision and just let it roll, and then just deal with it as time goes on. And sure. So, as an example of that, like choosing this city to live in, I keep saying to myself, if they are equal decisions, there's going to be benefits of living here. Why don't I just live here, and then maybe at the end of the year I can go stay in Seoul for 2 months or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
that's a good point. Seoul's not going anywhere. It'll be there. You could go there.
Right.
Down the road a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah. As long as you're going to be stuck in the country anyway, might as well live more than one place and check it out.
Right. Although, in saying that, it's a bit tricky because I have year contracts and I must sign a year contract for the visa. So it is like, if I go to Seoul, it's only going to be for like a month trip or something before I leave. I can never actually live there.
Gotcha. Not going to be able to settle in and have a life that daily experience to
exactly.
build up. Yeah. Gotcha.
Exactly.
I can make it tough too. Yeah. That's that kind of indecisive nature that I think we've done a pretty good job hitting on a lot of the major themes, but there's a lot of little stuff like why the concrete barrier without railing next to this large river. Now the river is because it's across from the vision of the place you needed to see to put the dream in context. But why this kind of stark situation? Maybe that is relating to you describe it as cutthroat, but I think it's a very rational, like you're weighing up the pros and cons type of thing, which is bare concrete kind of brings that to my mind. It gets the job done. It is what it is. It doesn't need to be pretty. It just needs to work, and it needs to work well. And it's like concrete is iconic of that as well. Of something that is solid, stable, it does its job, but it ain't pretty. But you don't need it to be pretty. You need it to be concrete. I don't know if that resonates with you at all. Just that idea.
I mean, when you were talking about I hadn't even realized it at all, but when you were talking about the iconic image of Melbourne that I discussed, that kind of did hit the nail on the head for me, that was a picture of sort of like home, like you mentioned, and that never fully clicked with me, but when you said it, I was like, oh yeah, that kind of does make sense. As for where I was sitting, I don't know. Yeah, because it is a weird one, because like I said, that's unusual. The fact that, like I mentioned, you can sit there at all. I remember noting that is unusual, but I really don't know what sort of significance that might have.
Sure. Yeah, and I was just throwing out ideas. I mean, why? It wasn't a park bench. You weren't sitting, say, on the hood of a car. There's all things that you weren't perched on the limb of a tree. It could have been any of these bizarre type of things. I also did write down when you were saying that is that this was an impossible place. This place where this conversation is happening not only doesn't exist because something is there, but it's really, it's not some place you could get to anyway. Or could you? Like you said, there's a train station there, but it's not an accessible place. No. The edge of this train station near the river. So there might be something there of your brain putting you in a place that doesn't exist, in an impossible place where this conversation happens. I'm not sure what to make of that necessarily, but just phrasing it that way sometimes brings things to people's mind. It does or it doesn't. I don't know.
I mean, there's definitely the nature of when I was making decisions between which city to choose as well as where I was going to be. It did feel like it was impossible to make the correct decision, if that makes sense. It felt like if I came to this city, I was going to miss out on Seoul, which is like a quintessential Korean experience for me. I felt like it was like just every decision I was going to make was going to be incorrect.
Yeah, for sure. And that is a tough spot to be. That's an impossible position to be in. Is like, no matter what you choose, you're going to lose something. And there's what else? When you think of it that way, did any image from the dream pop back into your head? That kind of, other than sitting on the shoreline.
Not really. No, not really. I mean, I was thinking specifically of sitting on the shoreline and still dropping the cups, the one cup, but nothing else specific.
Okay. That might be it. Yeah. I mean, we might have covered the bases. I mean, are there any specific images or experiences from the dream where you feel like you still want to make sense of it, or we didn't touch on it, or we just didn't explain it fully? As I was saying earlier, I never know how to end these things. I mean, we might have gone as far as we can with it. If it feels good to you, right. Hey, we did it. If it doesn't, if there's something left, then we talk about it a little bit longer.
Guess this one, I don't know why it was this coffee shop, and I found. I mean, it could be something to do with the fact that was the place I worked at just before I came to Korea. It could be something to do with that. But yeah, I really don't know. Maybe it is.
Now, the contract you got that made you leave that job was in Korea. It was you were, or no?
No, I went to go work at a different coffee shop for a while, okay. And then I went to go.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, but do you now that we've kind of talked about it a little bit more, you brought us back there again to considering why this place. Did we talk about that in terms of did we already cover that, or you just wanted to mention it again, or are we still trying to figure it out?
I mean, we covered it in the respect that we were discussing it's like a kind of a small piece of guilt that's eating away, and not only that, it's like culpability. Trying to sort of like, hey, you're sort of culpable for this as well. But again, the strange part for me was why it was this coffee. Because I mean, I've had other situations in coffee shops where I feel more guilty, but I still think about now.
Gotcha. So what, why?
Maybe they've done things to me. Yeah, exactly. Why this place that is really like such a low hum on my radar in terms of past experiences.
Yeah. That is interesting. Maybe there's got to be something about that is similar. Something about the nature of the question you were pondering as you went to bed, or that played out on your mind in your sleep, that was trying to point you at a solution. I don't want to say a solution, but like an understanding. It's like putting a pin in it, putting a bookending something. It's like there is definitely a reason I would say that it showed you that place, and the conversation was with that person in this context. Not sure if some of the other. Go ahead.
It could be. I mean, this is the most basic form, but it could be accurate. The fact that it was quite a tricky decision for me to leave that job to take another job. I mean, it wasn't that tricky in terms of another job was better paying, better hours, and whatever else, but it was still like, wow, should I leave? Should I not leave? Should I take a job? So it was a lot more benign and softer than my current decision, but it was a similar sort of emotion, I guess.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too. Is you said you've had other jobs that it was more dramatic the leaving, but there was something specific about this one where it wasn't traumatic enough to say like you can't forget about it, you think about it every day. It's nothing near that, but there's something about it that didn't sit well with you. And it might have been, maybe with some of those other more dramatic situations, you felt a greater sense of justification, like you were clearly on the right side of those decisions. There was no two ways about it. And this one, you just weren't sure. And it seems like your general,
good shout.
Yeah, it seems like your general, not confusion, but indecision about where to move and what to do. But then you made that decision, and then you start second guessing yourself, and it brings back this other thing where you're like, I remember making what I thought was the right choice, but I still don't like it. Am I going to feel that way in the future? Sometimes our brain is just asking ourselves that question: am I going to regret this too, in a similar way that's going to bother me going forward? I don't know if that makes sense.
Actually, that's a good shout. That is a good shout because in other jobs, like you said, maybe it's been more dramatic, but I've been like, I made the right decision. Or vice versa. Like, if I've done something bad, I'm like, I've definitely done something bad here. I know I've done something bad. Whereas in this job, it was like I said, benign. And you're right, there was actually no right decision with this job because, it's kind of not nice to quit, but also I got to quit. So it's kind of, both decisions kind of suck, actually. That's a pretty good shout. That although it is order of magnitude less powerful than what's happening right now, that the actual emotions, now that you mention it, are actually pretty similar, pretty identical.
Yeah, and there's something too that's very complicated with relationships, because you're like, you don't want to be disloyal to someone who's been good to you. I mean, it feels like such a worse violation of this bond, of a trust, of a friendship, in a way. Like the American expression, I don't know if maybe it's more universal, but you go do me like that, really? You just that idea. It's like, I gotta do it. I gotta do this for me. It's what's right. Yeah. And then the other person's not happy about it, and you're not really happy about it. And there's an element of tragedy in it. It's like, this isn't good for anybody, but it's what's needs to happen. And then you just kind of, right. What are you going to do? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Cause I remember feeling annoyed at him for feeling that way as well. I remember being like, because we got along very well in terms of quite similar people. We both spent a long time working in cafes and restaurants and things like that. And when I quit, I knew that he had done things like this in the past. Because he has been, this is just the nature of the industry, if that makes sense. People come and go very quickly. That's the nature of hospitality. And I remember having a moment, seeing his reply, his kind of like very unhappy reply, thinking to myself, like, don't kid yourself. You know that this is what this work has sometimes, right? Yeah, I understand what you're doing because it's annoying, but I was expecting, when I sent him the message, I was expecting sort of a percentage of understanding, and I got absolutely zero.
Yeah, and that's rough too. It's like you kind of wish he'd been a little more generous in his understanding. That's tough too. That idea of generosity, of don't be so mad at me. I mean, you kind of, do you have to be that? Do you have to take it that hard? And it just feels rough. It's more rough than it needed to be if someone else kind of met you halfway and said, I don't like it. I wish you were doing it, but I get it. And he didn't even give you enough to say, I get it. It's just like, fuck you.
Absolutely.
That's gotta hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't ideal. It really wasn't.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that put a little bit more of that kind of element of it back into context. Did anything else stand out as far as images, experiences where you're like, that part, what is that?
No, but I will say, to your credit, actually, that I guess I always thought that when people were talking about dream interpretation, that it was almost as if the dream was trying to give you a lesson, or not only that, it was maybe trying to direct you in a certain way, or it had a very specific significance. But actually, it makes sense that a dream can be this mesh of a bunch of different conflicting stuff that's going on. And it's not not necessarily like a very guided and specific pattern. And that's what now since we've talked about it, that's kind of what it feels like to me. We're talking about this decision that you're uncertain about when I was leaving that job, and although it might not be significant at that time, it is actually the same emotion that I'm feeling now, despite the fact it's so much smaller. And talking about these ideas of losing things, which was very clear cut for me after the dream. And so it's kind of like this mixed melting pot amalgamation of all these different emotions. And it's actually strange to go through and analyze them and have these like moments in your head of, oh yeah, that does actually fit.
Yeah. I know. I love those too. It's like, that's why I throw them out there. I'm like, if I get I call it a tickle, a resonance, there's like something, a thought pops into my head. Why? Where does it come from? No idea, but something connected to something else, and bing, another light turned on. I tell you start playing with the same shape and looking at it from different angles. And then you're like, oh, it fits here. Oh, look at that. Oh, now I can tell that's the leg of a cat. Suddenly it's the leg of a cat because you put enough of the pieces in there. And I mean, I feel like this whole thing is magic. I don't even know what I'm doing. I mean, I have a process and I do it, and then crazy shit happens in my head and I start throwing ideas out there. And I mean, 9 times out of 10, we get something. There was one episode that I completely just blew it. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I put it up anyway. It was like episode 19. I titled it Going Nowhere because the person in the dream was stuck in a chair and I couldn't give him an answer. Both of us went nowhere with that, but we talked about it, and it was an interesting experience, but mostly there's something there. There's a reason, there's an idea our brain is processing in our sleep.
Right.
And because our brain really just never shuts off. It's always doing something. And then when we shut off that external stimuli, we got this stuff going on there, and it's always trying to give us an answer, always trying to figure it out so we can know how to respond to what's right in front of us or predict what's going to happen next.
Like you said at the very start of the podcast, I often have dreams with a specific word in the dream, a Spanish word, and it'll be a huge context of the dream. And I had one a while ago about the word like lento, which means slow in Spanish, right? And I was like trying to direct this group of people, and I kept saying this word, and I didn't really know what the word was. In the morning, I still didn't know what the word was, and I looked it up, and I saw it said slow, and suddenly I've never forgotten that word. I've never once forgotten that word because I dreamed about it and said the word in my dream. I swear 1,000 times I said this word in my dream, and seriously, that word is like my most quick to remember Spanish word now.
For sure. Yeah. And there's, the brain is just fascinating. That's why I got into psychology, but there's a certain number of people who think in images and a certain number of people who think in words and a certain number of people who think in both, but it's even more complicated than that too. It's more like we think in ideas, which sounds stupid. It's like a feeling. It's like a concept. It's like this thing that doesn't even have a word. And then we attach a word to it. And when we say the word, that's what we mean. So when you're learning a foreign language, for example, you're trying to get this shape of this thing that's attached to this sound coming out of your mouth. And that makes that's what kids are doing when they're trying to figure out, milk. And so they can ask for milk. They're like, what is this? What do I want? What is it? How do I say it to this person in a way that gets them to give me what I'm thinking? And then, so to dream of it like that's fantastic. Yeah. So you made that concept solid in your head, and it's
very physically. Yeah.
That's when they say people are fluent. They start thinking in other languages. They start putting those ideas together in their head, in that conceptual framework. That's awesome. I'm never going to do it. I waited too long and I don't have enough drive to get it done. I'm still trying to master English. I can barely get that right.
Yeah, you've really got to want to learn a language more than have like the ability to study something like that. If that makes sense. Yeah, I've spoken to people who studied a language out of obligation, and it never works. It never works. You've got to do it a switch flip where you go, I want to learn this language. Otherwise, it just does not happen.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I am kind of picking up a little bit more Latin here and there. I mean, I got a bit from going to school and whatnot, but then I edited this book, tremendous amount of Latin, and I'm doing all this translation using, honestly, just Google Translate, but it had to make sense in the context. I had to put the words in the right place because it was a mess. So that it would make me extremely happy if I could actually learn Latin, but I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Right.
I'll pick up enough as I go along. I'm never going to speak it, and if it's never going to resurrect never going to write an entire book in Latin. It's not going to happen. But if anything, I would probably do that.
Necessity.
Yeah, if anything, it would probably be that because it's so useful to where our language came from. English anyway. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can just ramble for hours. But we're almost 2 hours in. I'm gonna cut this down a little bit. But do you think we got to a pretty good understanding of this experience for you?
Pretty surprised, honestly, but I feel like it's been a pretty great analysis of it. I feel, like I said just before, I feel like this sort of meshwork definitely has a bit more understanding of why, I guess, the emotions I was feeling at the time.
Definitely. It just has to make sense. I mean, will we ever know if this understanding we came to is the right answer? No, but if it works, it's good enough, right? And definitely,
definitely agree. Definitely.
If and to anyone watching, and anyone who talks to me, if you ever get an answer that's like, yeah, but I still wonder, talk to somebody else. It's perfectly fine. I don't own your dream now that you talk to me about it. Someone else might have a different understanding. They might see something I can't because they're just coming from a little different perspective. I'm just one guy doing a thing. There's a lot of different folks out there that can give you some pretty good insights and kind of help you put the pieces together and might be able to tell you something I don't know. So
definitely,
that's good too. Well, let me gather up my notes here, and we'll, if you would, wrap up the show and then hang out for just a minute afterwards, and we'll talk, just say proper goodbyes. So this is our friend Connor. He does the Blunt Report. You can find him at theblunt.report.com. He's on Instagram, Reddit, all over the internet, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. I just want to say, hey, thank you for joining me. It was great to talk to you. I will definitely be, what was I trying to say? I was going to say something. It completely jumped out of my head. It's getting late in the day for me. I'm getting tired. So, but I just appreciate you being here. It was good to talk to you. And I don't know if you want to say anything about your podcast, social media before we wrap up.
I mentioned again, which was the sleep series where I speak to some experts, which for listeners might be very, very interesting.
Very nice. Yeah. And everyone, don't forget to look in the description below. I'm going to throw in links to all this stuff, to the bluntreport.com and to the Instagram and podcast stuff. So that's about it for this episode of Dreamscapes. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.